And welcome to the USBE Prevention and Student Services webinar series. My name is Michelle Knight, and I'm going to go over some housekeeping items before we get started. So everybody is aware, this webinar series is recorded. We will be sending the slides out as well as the recording afterwards, probably within the next few days to a week or so. Please put your questions in the chat and we will pause along the way to answer them or respond as we can. We do encourage everyone mutes during the presentation. However, we will also ask for participation, and at that point, you can unmute, raise your hand, type it in the chat, however you can participate. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I will now turn it to Clarissa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clarissa Stebbing. I'm a prevention specialist here at the State Board of Education. I am primarily responsible for substance use prevention here at the board, and that is our topic today. So I am going to jump right in with our learning intentions. You have a sense of what we're going to cover today, and I'm just glad that you're here. I'm glad to see so many great faces. Okay. So our learning intentions for today is that by the end of the session, you'll be able to understand the consequences of youth substance use on the developing brain. We'll review Utah's youth substance use data, learn about Utah's state laws related to substance use prevention in schools, identify effective strategies for preventing substance use within the protective factor framework, and then we'll discover a few substance use prevention resources and where to go to find those. All right, so let's start off by taking a look at the consequences of youth substance use. When I say substance use, I'm talking about underage drinking, nicotine use, marijuana, illicit drugs. I'm just using substance use as a catch-all for all of that. And these impacts, when youth use substances, these impacts go far beyond short-term effects. They influence brain development, decision-making, academic success, and even long-term health outcomes. And understanding these consequences help us explain why prevention matters, as well as why early intervention is critical. So we are going to start off with the developing brain. Adolescence is a time of rapid brain development. The prefrontal cortex, so the part of the brain responsible for attention, learning, mood regulation, and impulse control, is under construction and is until the mid-20s on average. For some, it takes even longer for the brain to be fully developed. And when substances like alcohol, nicotine, or marijuana are introduced during this critical period, they interfere with normal development, which can lead to difficulty focusing and retaining information, which affects school performance. It can lead to mood instability, which can increase vulnerability to anxiety and depression, can lead to poor impulse control, making teens more likely to engage in risky behaviors. And we already know that the teen years is a time where there's less impulse control, but substance use can impact that even further. And then perhaps most concerning, early substance use increases the risk of addiction later on in life, which can lead to a multitude of issues. And that's because the brain's reward pathways adapt to substance exposure. So the research shows that the younger youth starts using any type of substance, the more susceptible to addiction they are. And then beyond these immediate or shorter term effects, research shows that there are long-term health consequences, such as chronic conditions like liver disease, cardiovascular problems, and mental health disorders later on in adulthood. Additional impacts are listed here. So substance use is linked to impaired decision making, as mentioned previously. That's led to behaviors like drinking and driving, unprotected sex, violence, as well as injury and death. And then in schools, we also see an academic impact. So the research has linked substance use to higher absenteeism. Research shows that students are more likely to skip school if they use substances. And disciplinary actions due to using substances on school grounds has can also result in missed school days. And then substance use has also been linked to lower grades and increased failure rates, which can derail future opportunities. And then remember, these behaviors often compound the long-term health risks that we mentioned or that I mentioned earlier. So prevention is not just a school issue, it's a lifelong health issue. Are there any questions about consequences before we move on to some of the trends that we're seeing and what the data shows us? Don't see any questions in the chat. Okay, I will go ahead and move on. Um, so on this chart, we see the latest data that we have in Utah related to substance use. So these data points come from the 2025 SHARP survey. This is a survey that is administered to students in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12 in Utah every other year. So it was administered this last spring of 2025. And it is a survey that is an opt-in survey. So parents have to sign off, the school has to sign off, the student has to sign off. However, even with that, we have a lot of students, thousands and thousands of students take this survey. So we do have a lot of robust data from this survey. And our most recent survey shows that alcohol is currently the substance that is used the most amongst youth. This is a switch from previous years where vaping has been the number one substance used by youth. This year it's switched to alcohol, which is currently the most commonly reported substance, with 10.9% lifetime use and 3.8% past 30-day use. Researchers look at that past 30-day use number to indicate current usage versus the lifetime use might be more experimental. Vaping, we can see that lifetime use was reported at 8.1% with 3.5% in the past 30 days, marijuana 6.2% with 2.9% in the past 30 days. Then we have inhalants, cigarettes, and prescription drugs coming in lower rates. And even though our data here in Utah is lower than the national average, I think there's a few takeaways from this. One is that we are doing some really good things here in Utah. We are lower than the national average. So that's something to be really proud of, and we want to continue to do the good things that we're doing. And then at the same time, there are still students who are using substances. We just talked through some of the consequences associated with student substance use. And so we want to not forget about those students, and we still want to do what we can to make these numbers even lower because these numbers represent actual students. So this really does highlight the importance of the work that we are all doing for our students. This next chart here, it shows us some trend lines. So I've taken the three most commonly used substances, alcohol, marijuana, and vaping. Typically, nicotine is in the SHARP survey. It does separate them out, but I've used the data where it just combines it here. But we can look here at the trend lines from 2019. And in 2019, so the gray is vaping. That's when we saw a peak in youth vaping rates. Orange is marijuana, blue is alcohol. So we're mostly trending down. And the vaping rates, as I mentioned, it peaked in 2019, and there have been a lot of policies and programs in place since then, which is likely to have contributed to this decline in vaping rates. In the 2020 general legislative session here in Utah, there was a lot of concern around the 2019 data. And so there were a lot of laws that were in place. So Health Education Corps had to mention vaping and the health consequences of that. There were there was an underage drinking and substance use prevention program that got expanded into elementary schools. And so there are lots of other things that we'll talk about later that may have contributed to this decline. All right. Before we move on to our substance use prevention in schools state laws section, I wanted to just check the chat, see if we have any questions related to the data. Let's see, what's the age range for this data set? Okay, looks like Michelle answered that question. Thank you. Um, and Michelle's answered all the questions. Okay, great. So no other questions related to the data? Then we shall move on. So in the next section, we'll take a look at state requirements that support substance use prevention in schools. And I do want to remind everyone that these laws aren't just about compliance. They are designed to help us create safe, supportive environments where students can thrive. And as you can see from the previous numbers, what we've been doing across the state seems to be working and doing well, since we are seeing some really positive things in the direction of our substance use rates. The first thing I wanted to mention is our health education core standards. The health education is core. All students should be offered this, and standards include a substance use prevention strand. This is required by state law that there be a substance use prevention addressed in health. And so this strand is in every grade level. So it's K through 6, middle school, and high school. And I have the health triangle here. If you're familiar with the health core standards, this is in the book associated with that. And substance use prevention, I just want to point out that it touches all three areas: mental and emotional health, physical health, and social health. Its substance use prevention supports mental health by reducing risk factors for anxiety and depression. It protects physical health by preventing harm to the developing brain and body. And it strengthens social health by promoting positive relationships, as well as decision making and other social skills. Utah law requires that all schools implement an evidence-based underage drinking and substance use prevention program in grades 4 or 5 and 7 or 8 and 9 or 10. And currently, the only approved program to meet the law's requirements is the Botvin Life Skills Training. And the Botvin Life Skills Training is a program that has a lot of research behind it. It has decades of research, in fact, showing positive outcomes. This is a program that teaches students skills and also gives them an opportunity to practice those skills in the classroom. Um, which and the skills that they're learning have been proven to reduce the likelihood of substance use. So they're learning decision making skills, coping strategies, and drug resistance skills, which are all critical tools for navigating peer pressure and stress. The next substance use prevention requirement of all schools is to have what is called a positive behaviors plan. A positive behaviors plan is a plan to address the causes of student use of alcohol, tobacco, electronic cigarette products, and other controlled substances through promoting positive behaviors. So when you hear me talk about a positive behaviors plan, I'm talking about a substance use prevention plan as defined in Utah law. And this is a plan that needs to be created by the school principal with input from parents, students, and staff. And it must address peer pressure, mental health, and creating meaningful relationships. So it needs to be collaboratively developed, and then it also needs to go to the local school board for approval. Utah law also requires schools to have a suicide prevention program, and this is in every school. And the requirements of the suicide prevention program mirror those. It closely mirrors those requirements for the positive behaviors plan. So I have the requirements of the suicide prevention programs listed here on this slide. And as you can see, oh, there's a lot of overlap there. So these programs can and should be developed together. We know that risk factors and protective factors often overlap. We call that shared risk and protective factors. And then also the law, the suicide prevention program law specifically states that suicide prevention efforts should collaborate and must collaborate with underage drinking and substance use prevention programs. So having this integrated approach can help schools effectively and efficiently address student well-being. All right, I want to pause there before we move on to strategies and see if there are any questions related to prevention requirements, substance use prevention requirements.
Larissa, we had one question in the chat. Do you have any data on Zyn use among youth?
There is, yeah, good question. So Zyn is the nicotine pouch. That's a little pouch that goes in the mouth or in the cheek that can be sucked on. There is some data, they call that it's under nicotine pouch in the Sharp survey. I didn't include that here on the slide deck. It's low. Anecdotally, I have heard that schools are starting to see it more. So I recommend checking out the Sharp survey data. I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, unfortunately, but it is listed on the Sharp survey report. Are there any other questions, Michelle?
There is one, and I'm not sure how to answer this. Amanda asked, how will these laws be affected if the USBE meeting today eliminates funding for such programs and people who support them, such as social workers? And Amanda, that is a great question that we are all interested in the answer for.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. We don't have a very clear answer on that. We're not entirely sure at this point. Okay. Any other questions related to program requirements? I'm going to move on to effective strategies. And before we do that, though, I want to give you an invitation to please keep the positive behaviors plan requirements in mind as we discuss these strategies, so that whether or not you are directly involved with developing or implementing your school's positive behaviors plan, you can still have um, some input, some influence over that because it should be developed collaboratively. And I do encourage you to think about those requirements, which are addressing peer pressure, mental health, and creating meaningful relationships. So as we go through all these strategies, think about, oh, how can I incorporate this strategy into that plan? And to frame these strategies, I wanted to take a look at the protective factor framework. The protective factor framework is a research-informed approach to prevention that the State Board of Education prevention team has been promoting for the past several years. Hopefully you've heard of it. This framework organizes prevention strategies around factors that buffer youth from risk. So we have concrete supports in times of need, knowledge of development, social connections, resilience, cognitive, emotional, and social competence as the 5 protective factors. And I'll be placing each substance use prevention strategy within these categories so that you can see how they fit into a comprehensive approach. The first protective factor within the protective factor framework is concrete supports in times of need. These are strategies that help students meet their basic needs. So sleep, food, good nutrition, and they also can help manage stress, which are critical for reducing substance use risk. So what is a strategy that you can do within this protective factor? And that is to encourage students to get enough sleep. Sleep is a powerful protective factor, which we may not think about when we think about substance use prevention, but the ABCD study, so the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, is the largest long-term study of child brain development in the United States. And this study recently came out with information that shows that adequate sleep reduces stress and lowers the likelihood of substance use. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends that kids ages 6 to 12 get 9 to 12 hours of sleep each night, and that kids ages 13 to 18 get 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And unfortunately, we have learned from the SHARP survey that our kids need more sleep. So 39 in the most recent survey in 2025, 39.2% of kids report 8 or more hours of sleep on average per night, with the lowest being 12th graders. I'm sure that's no surprise to any of you. They reported 21.4% getting 8 or more hours of sleep on average. And then our 6th graders are getting the most sleep at 56.3% are getting 8 or more hours a night. So that's certainly an area that we can encourage students and parents to get more sleep, and that is substance use prevention. As we encourage healthy sleep habits, students become more resilient and less likely to turn to substances. The second protective factor within the protective factor framework is knowledge of development, and helping youth understand their own brain development is a powerful prevention tool. The adolescent brain is still developing and more susceptible to addiction, as I mentioned earlier in this webinar, and it's important for our kids to be aware of that. When kids understand how substances affect their developing brain, they are less likely to use substances. And we didn't have enough time today, but for more information on this topic, there is a video that you can watch on YouTube. It's the Mountain Plains PTTC video. It features Dr. Jason Burrows-Sanchez from the University of Utah. We'll be sending these slides out, so you can click the link there, or you can just Google this right now if you're really excited to watch it after the webinar. And Dr. Burrows-Sanchez explains adolescent brain development and how to talk with youth about brain development in ways that resonate, making them less likely to use substances. Social connections is the third protective factor. Strong relationships are one of the most effective buffers against substance use. And youth who have positive relationships with adults and peers with healthy behaviors are less likely to engage in substance use. So do what you can to enhance connections and bonding with pro-social adults and peers. When youth feel supported by caring adults and peers who model healthy behaviors, their risk of substance use drops significantly. And I want to just pause here to give you some time to think about ways your school fosters positive relationships within the school. So perhaps you provide opportunities in the classroom for students to work together. Maybe your school has a mentoring program, or you encourage students to join after school clubs as a way of connecting with others. So think about that for a second, because I want you to share your ideas and what you have done in the chat so that we can learn from one another and get ideas from each other. So please either share in the chat or come off mute if you want one activity or practice that you have used that enhances connections and bonding for students at your school or within your district. So I'm going to pause here to give you time to put your responses in the chat or to come off mute. Lots of after school clubs. Great. PCCR meetings ask students who is their trusted adult in the building that they can go to. A lunch bunch once a week. Students come have lunch with the counselors and other youth. We eat and play games. Hope Squad, peer support for students at risk. Activities at lunch, no phones at lunch. We also have after school hangout on Friday for kids to just come play board games, color, lunch bunch, lunch in the counseling office, lunch bunch and chess clubs, lots of lunch bunches. That's great. Bonding activities in our advisory. Our school uses We Are Crew. I'm not familiar with that. Brianna, feel free to tell us more about that in the chat. Hope Squad, PTA events, lunch activities, mentor program where peers support each other, classroom circles. We also use science data to personally invite students to certain clubs, field trips. Okay, so you're actually using data to decide who's going to likely want to go to which club. Our Hope Squad does monthly lunch activities to encourage social connection. We also have some great clubs during lunch and after school. Buddy Mentor, crew every morning, students connect and get to know each other. No phones in school, Gear Up and Hope Squad. Love this. Okay, lots of great ideas for connection. Oh, more coming. Tier 1 intervention. I do a classroom presentation on a different topic every month. This month we're covering friendship with this data in mind. We play games to get to know different classmates. Great. Champion teachers. Yeah, we don't want to forget our teachers either. We want them to also build connection. Okay, so we are crew. Classes have crew meetings each day. They also do service projects together. Um, Greeting, reading initiative, debrief around topic. It's a place where students build strong relationships. That sounds like right in line with positive behavior plan requirements right there. And then after school clubs, the library is open for students. I love this. You all are doing so many great things to help students connect with each other, bond, and just really feel connected within the school. That's a huge protective factor. Relationships are so key. So I love that you are providing opportunities for students to be able to get to know each other and to feel that connection. Let's go ahead and move on. If you think of other ideas, feel free to continue to put those in the chat so that people can get your ideas and maybe implement them in their own schools. So let's move on to resilience. This is the fourth protective factor. Resilience is being able to move forward in the face of challenge. And we all go through hard things as do students. So these resilient strategies are really key for us to learn. Resilient strategies help students cope with stress in healthy ways rather than turning to substances. So, teaching healthy alternatives is a powerful substance use prevention strategy. Many youth turn to substances as a way to manage their own stress or emotional pain that they're experiencing. So, we want to teach them healthy coping strategies such as mindfulness, exercise, or creative outlets as an effective way to deal with life's stressors in a more healthier way. So I'm going to give you another opportunity to engage and to share your own ideas. There are a number of different coping strategies that are healthy, and coping strategies that are healthy alternatives to using substances. And what works for one might not work for another, or what works for me one day might not be as effective the next day. So let's go ahead and brainstorm as many healthy coping strategies as possible in the chat. So we've got the selfie method. Elisa, can you type in what selfie stands for those of us who can't remember all of them? Body attunement, using emotions and feelings as data, mindfulness, use wellness room, lots of mindfulness, breathing techniques, moving your body in a healthy way, jumping jacks, elephant walks, walking, slow, deep breathing, self-compassion, shared humanity, self-kindness, exercise, breathing techniques, journaling, reading, music, stop, name your feelings, calm down, problem solving, self-care time, talking to someone, mindfulness skills, learned in learning to breathe, music, providing service opportunities to forget self, connecting with others, wise mind, breathing, yoga, exercise, art, positive self-talk, um, selfie method. We've heard here, there's that again. Plus, we have a handout with 100 coping techniques. So you brainstormed a lot of those and asked students to pick 5 that they most like to use. Um, these comments are making me happy too. Thanks, Kyler. Sleep, exercise, light, fun, interaction, eating, right. Visual arts, physical arts, practicing gratitude, by tapping. We've brainstormed a lot. Any other? Yep, there we go. Healthy friendships. Dear man skill. Oh, Amanda, tell us more about that one. Ah, DBT. It's a DBT skill. Service. Describe, express, assert, reinforce, stay mindful, appear confident, negotiate. Talking it out. Okay. I love all of the ideas that you've shared. We've come up with a huge list. We know there's at least 100 out there since somebody has a list of 100. So, and I think it's great to give kids a list, maybe let them come up with some on their own. Maybe they need some prompts on to get started and let them choose what they think might work best for them. Because um, again, what might work for one might not be another. I know some people use like to go running as a coping skill. I don't want to go running. I'd rather do maybe walking instead. So, yeah, it's great to have lots of options. Coping skills toolbox. We all have things that work for us. Yeah, that's great. So you know exactly what to go to when in moments of high distress. So we'll go ahead and uh, pause there, but keep your ideas coming. I'm going to move on, but if you think of more healthy alternatives, more coping skills, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'd love to hear your ideas. Okay. The last protective factor is cognitive, emotional, and social competence. This protective factor focuses on building skills that can ultimately help youth make healthy choices and resist risky behaviors. So, some of the strategies within this category that have been shown to be effective related to substance use prevention is to cite immediate consequences. When talking with youth, emphasizing immediate consequences, things that they can relate to now rather than things that seem distant. So, for example, vaping can make it harder to breathe while playing sports. That is a more immediate consequence versus, oh, vaping can cause lung damage when you're 60. Okay. Alcohol can affect your ability to focus in class tomorrow. That's something that's more of an immediate consequence. The research shows that these near-term impacts resonate more with teens than the distant risks like cancer or death. And that's not to say that kids shouldn't be made aware of the long-term consequences. They ought to know that even a tiny amount of fentanyl can be deadly and that it can be laced in things you wouldn't expect. So they should be made aware of that. However, the research shows that emphasizing the immediate consequences are more effective for behavior change among adolescents. So that's where our focus ought to be. Skill building is another effective strategy. Research has shown that teaching skills such as self-control, emotional awareness, communication, problem solving, um, and academic support, especially reading in elementary school, is an effective way to decrease the likelihood of youth going on to use substances in the future. And then it shows that kids who are engaged in programs where they're learning skills such as in secondary school, such as study habits, communication, peer relationships, self-efficacy and assertiveness, and drug resistance skills, again, are less likely to initiate substances later in life. So these skills listed here is what the research has shown are really key in for kids to learn so that they're less likely to go on and use substances. And then, of course, these skills are just good life skills to have in general. So whenever you can provide students an opportunity to practice these, to learn these skills and then practice them in a safe environment, it's always a good thing. And programs that include peer-led components tend to be more effective than adult-only approaches. I think I heard mention earlier about some of you using some peer-led component programs. The research shows that um, this tends to resonate more with kids. So do consider integrating peer voices into your prevention efforts as part of your comprehensive approach. And just as an example, my niece is taking biology in high school, and she was recently assigned to research and present on how alcohol affects the body. And yeah, so she's presenting that to her class. She is their peer, telling them how it is impacting their bodies. And this is just an example of a peer-to-peer prevention activity that's embedded within the school day. It's her biology class. It's not an after-school program or anything like that. It's just embedded in, and that's a peer-to-peer, a peer-led component. I'm wondering if anybody is already doing this, if you have any peer-led components in place. If you do, go ahead and either come off mute or put it in the chat. Does anyone have any like youth-led prevention clubs or coalitions within your school? Nothing so far. That's okay. Oh, yep, we do. Student leadership team and help have yes, it's good to have an adult present as well, but great. So Melissa's doing that. If you have other ideas for peer-led components, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'll move on, but again, it's always great to get ideas from other people throughout the state as to what you're doing and what's working. Hope Squad, Community Youth Coalition, Kindness Group. Okay, just takes a second for y'all to type. Our health class had the students create videos about the harm of substances and then watches a class. Very cool. SBOs, CAPSA Youth Council, Kindness Group. Great ideas. Okay, I'll move on, but again, keep putting your ideas in the chat. All right, communicating positive social norms. Most Utah students do not use substances. We mentioned this earlier. And so we want to communicate that. But as we look at this data, we see, again, I'm going to look at vaping as that's the second one. 8.1% of students vape, 3 point or have vaped, and 3.5 vape in the last 30 days. However, we can communicate a positive norm by flipping that around and by sharing that over 90% of Utah students have never vaped, and more than 96% of students do not currently vape. That's communicating a positive social norm. Um, Also, as part of communicating positive social norms, you want to avoid showing images of youth using substances because those visuals can unintentionalize, normalize the behavior. So instead, what we want to do is we want to show and or talk about what we want kids to be doing. We want to highlight the positive norms and healthy choices. So we're showing images of kids making good choices and making healthy choices. So that is an example of what communicating positive social norms are. And the research shows that to be an effective substance use prevention strategy. Going along with communicating positive norms, I want to touch on this about perceived norms versus actual norms. So, the research shows that that people tend to have a perception of what is, and that it's different from what it actually is. So, for example, a perceived norm would be everyone's vaping, when the data actually shows us that the actual norm is that most students don't vape. And the research shows that when we close the gap between what the perceived norm is and what the actual norm is, outcomes improve. So you can maybe think of this as like a reverse peer pressure. When you know that most aren't vaping, you're less likely to vape yourself. So use that data to reinforce the truth that the majority of students are making healthy choices. Exposure to evidence-based programs and strategies is a protective factor. So, evidence-based programs are programs that have been proven to effectively achieve desired outcomes, and they've been researched. Um, when you're selecting prevention programs, choose those that have been backed by evidence. I've listed some program directories here. I recommend when thinking about whether or not to incorporate a program into a school to check to see if their program has research, is it on any program directories? Um, these directories are all posted on the State Board of Education's prevention website, so you can go back to that and look. Um, I like to call out Blueprints for its filter feature. It's useful in that you can filter it down to school programs. I'm looking for this age range. I want tier one, tier two, or tier three, or I want to address both. I want a program that addresses both substance use prevention and bullying prevention. So you can have multiple areas of focus for one program. So I really like that filter feature. That's one thing that I like to point out to people. And so just remember that evidence-based programs save time and resources because they've been tested and shown to be effective. So in this section, we are going to look at some strategies that research shows are ineffective or less effective, and maybe in some cases even harmful. So in addition to knowing what does work, it's also important to know what doesn't work so that we can avoid them in the future. But before we jump into examples of ineffective strategies, I do want to share this quote by Maya Angelou. She says, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." This quote can remind us that prevention is a learning process. There are many approaches that were once common practices and they had good intentions. However, research shows that some practices don't achieve the desired outcomes. And so, as we learn more about what works, it's important to keep improving and make any needed shifts in the work that we're doing. So, if during today's webinar you discovered that you've been using an ineffective strategy, go ahead and give yourself some grace. And now that you know better, you can do something different moving forward. All right, so the first is to avoid stigmatizing language and visuals. So instead of saying addict or drug user, We want to use person first language, like a person who uses substances or a person with a substance use disorder. The field is also moving away from terms like substance abuse, and we're now simply using the term substance misuse or just substance use. And these changes with our language reduces shame and encourages help seeking. Second, we want to avoid knowledge only approaches. It's simply giving facts about drugs doesn't change behavior. Students need skills. They need refusal strategies, coping tools, and future focused thinking. So, if we're going to provide the information, we need the skills to go along with that. And then finally, avoid role playing the problem behavior. So, for example, activities like beer goggles can unintentionally normalize substance use rather than preventing it. And again, role playing the problem behavior doesn't actually teach the skills that are needed to avoid the behavior. So, we want to think about skill building always. Fear-based strategies, such as mock car crashes, are developmentally inappropriate for youth and can be counterproductive. The research around this has shown that these programs rarely lead to positive behavior change, and it can actually increase risky behaviors. Especially, they tend to be least effective for those that are most at risk, and they may cause psychological harm for some. Um, Also, when teens perceive exaggerated dangers or distant consequences, they often dismiss the message or even rebel against it, which can make these approaches ineffective and potentially harmful. Um, One-time assemblies and events are less effective than an ongoing program where the message of prevention is reinforced and when skills can be learned over time. So it's not to say never do a one-time assembly or event, but just to remember that with that one-time assembly, that's not going to be enough to comprehend, not going to be enough for a student to learn skills, and it's not going to be enough for a comprehensive prevention approach. So we need those other programs in place that are helping kids develop connections with others and learn skills. And then using personal testimony from someone in recovery as a universal prevention strategy is not recommended because it can unintentionally normalize drug use. When youth hear stories of past substance use, they may perceive that everyone uses, and they are also seeing the speaker receiving positive attention, which can, of course, undermine prevention efforts by making drug use seem common or acceptable. So, while personal stories can inspire hope in treatment or recovery settings, they're inappropriate for general prevention due to the potential for harm. So, instead, again, I'm going to just really hound this, focus on strategies that empower students, such as promoting skill building, positive norms, healthy relationships, and protective factors. Are there any questions to this point? Pause here. Okay. Just want to make sure you know where to go to find tools and guidance to support your prevention efforts. And so we have some resources on the Utah State Board of Education's Substance Use Prevention Resources page. So it's schools.utah.gov/prevention, and you can, under programs, there's a button where you can click where you can go into substance use prevention. So on there, we have best practices and resources library with specifically focused on alcohol and tobacco prevention and cessation. We have more information on the positive behaviors plan. We have a list of evidence-based program directories. We have links to sites where you can learn more about a specific substance. There are links to sites that are Utah created, such as Parents Empowered, which is underage drinking prevention, or Gray Matters, which is youth marijuana prevention. So there's a variety of sites that you can go to learn more that are also research backed. And now I want to give you an opportunity to take a moment to just reflect and to think about what you have learned today. Sometimes we just run from one thing to the next. And so I want to give you an opportunity to really reflect. Think about one thing that you want to start doing, one thing that you want to, one or more things that you want to stop doing, and think about any practices that you want to continue to do. So feel free to jot these down. You can share that in the chat, write it on a piece of paper for your own use. The research does show that if you write something down, you're more likely to do it. So I'm going to give you a moment to write it in the chat or just to write it on your own notes. Hopefully that was enough time for you to reflect on things you want to start, stop, and continue doing. I want to address a question in the chat about the 2 billion federal funding cuts yesterday. So yes, Amanda's correct. Those funds were restored. Um, and this recording will be available hopefully within the next week. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, you're welcome to contact me at any time if you think of a question, but we do want to thank you for joining this month's webinar. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, February 19th from 12 to 1 p.m. And it will be on understanding and supporting student mental health. It's designed for educators and will provide foundational knowledge to support student mental health in school settings. Participants will learn about the mental health continuum, common disorders such as neurological attachment and mood disorders, and practical approaches for fostering supportive relationships. The webinar emphasizes creating inclusive environments that promote well-being and academic success, with a protective factor focus on social connections and cognitive, emotional, and social competence. We also would love for you to please share your feedback with us. We've got the QR code here. Your feedback will help us make future webinars more useful for you. So please just take a few minutes to do that. And then if you have any questions for me related to substance use prevention, please feel free to reach out. My contact information will go out with the slide deck. I'm also happy to review positive behaviors plans and provide any feedback on those. If anybody's just curious for some feedback, happy to look at those. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I think we'll probably end just a few minutes early, but I don't think anyone is going to be too upset about that. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.